right, guys, welcome back to Unfinished Business Deep Dive. And this is Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions. And as always, the main man himself, Mr. Jeff Galashaw. And for this deep dive this week, we're going back to the 90s again, and we're going to go back to one of the earliest performances of the Oscar-winning legend, Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's a film that, quite honestly, kind of freaked me out when I was relatively young, but I've grown to appreciate it more over time, and that is The Basketball Diaries, which was directed by the late Scott Kalvert, and it's based on a novel by Jim Carroll. So this is a film that's pretty much, it's a straightforward character study. You have Leonardo DiCaprio, and this was also one of the early performances of Mark Wahlberg back when he was still shaking the Marky Mark image. He is a Catholic school basketball player with a group of friends who always get into a little bit of mischief and a lot of trouble, and pretty much typical teenage boy stuff in New York City. And his world is kind of shaken up a little bit when his best friend dies of, I believe he died of cancer or leukemia, and he was played by Michael Imbrugli from The Sopranos. So this results in him getting involved in heroin. And little by little, he gets into all kinds of trouble, gets kicked out of his house, actually runs away from home. And next thing you know, he and his buddies who are kicked out of school, on the streets, getting high, robbing stores and cars or whatever else. And it's just a full descent down into the lowest depths of the New York City underbelly. And it takes a lot for him to basically have to lose it all before he turns his life around, at least little by little. And this was probably the one role he did after This Boy's Life, which was like his first real breakout performance, where we finally got to see the promise of this young actor who had so much range, could give 100% on screen, and quite honestly was going to go on to be one of our finest actors of this generation. And of course, Marky Mark would go on to have a great career, but this was when he actually was having a good performance that was real and true to life, to his own struggles as a young man before he became, a moneymaker at the box office, and kind of started playing the straight man leading roles afterwards. So Jeff, talk about your experience with The Basketball Diaries, because I know I first saw this movie on cable probably around the time Titanic came out, when all those movies were starting to play all the time, and really just being kind of gripped by the subject matter and the maturity of it. So what was your experience with this film?
Well, I have been a Leonardo DiCaprio. It's odd you saying legend, because I'm just like, oh my God, I remember when he just started out. But I'll admit, I watched Growing Pains with him on it.
So did I.
I watched This Boy's Life, which, was the first, like you said, was one of the first films where I was like, whoa, this guy has talent. And What's Eating Gilbert Grape, where he actually got nominated for an Oscar. And this was like one of his first roles, just based on his name. So I remember like a lot of commercials for it. And I was looking forward to it because, you had all these New York-based actors in it, Lorraine Bracco playing his mom. You even have, even though he's a good character in this, it's odd Ernie Hudson's in this movie.
Yeah.
As his pal. It's like, why does he know an older black male? It's like, but anyway, before this, when I found out this movie was being made, I was totally excited. I even read the book before the movie, back when I used to do things like that. And, I'm reading the book, it's like, whoa, this is going to be so deep and different. And I saw this movie, ironically, when Times Square still had movie theaters. I saw it in Times Square, like a rap, and this film, depicts Times Square so seedy, and watching it at the same place, and it's like starting its commercialization was a little strange or meta. But again, I really enjoyed. I knew who Michael Imperioli was, but I was like, kind of old to be playing a teenager with cancer, And Marky Mark looks way too old to be.
Yeah, he does.
A high school student, but he's the only person in the movie with a physique that would be believable as a high school basketball star too. I will admit, when I first heard the casting of this movie, I wasn't so excited for Leonardo DiCaprio. it was Cynthia and Brittany Daniel started being in the film as the twins. Because I had seen them on Sweet Valley High, and I was just like, whoa, and it might be a sex scene. You know, so I was like, whoa, this is gonna be awesome. And then I saw the movie. It's one of these movies where all the actors are good in it, but the lead actor is better than the material.
Yes.
And he's the thing that makes this film work. Because no offense to Scott Kalvert, but this feels like an MTV depiction of an after-school special.
Yeah.
That's what I kept thinking throughout the whole film. Was like, okay, why did you choose to do this? Why did you choose to do that? The only time it rings true is, like you said, the character scenes of him going deeper into drug addiction and showing the depths, and especially when he's like trying to kick heroin and, you know, seeing the sickness. That those are the scenes that are the most powerful. But, you know, like them beating up guys from a rival basketball team on a boat, it was just like, okay. And especially what I call the teeny bopper scene, where after their friend dies, the guys decide to play basketball, not only in the rain, but all with their shirts off. I was just like, yeah, I don't think this scene's for me. So, but it did have that kick-ass song by Jim Carroll. These Are People Who Died, which, you know, he has 2 songs in the movie, and that's the most memorable. But like you were saying, it's more memorable for Leonardo DiCaprio, and this is the movie he did right before he did Titanic. And, you know, the interesting thing is he was supposed to do Boogie Nights, and he passed on it to do Titanic, and then his co-star here ends up getting Boogie Nights, and that's what started Marky Mark on into acclaim. And it's interesting, like you said, that Marky Mark plays these straight-laced leads, whereas it works in maybe a movie like Spencer, even though he ends up not being the most memorable. But I find that Marky Mark is strongest when he's more the supporting off-center character.
Yeah.
Like in The Departed, you know, where, you know, he plays pretty normal, but he has all the best one-liners in the film. Or in I Heart Huckabees, where he's like this environmentalist fireman, you know, where it's just so off-kilter and something you wouldn't expect for him. And that's where, you know, the strength comes. The thing I found really interesting about this film, though, looking back, and even when I saw it, was that you have Michael Rappaport and Juliette Lewis in it, and they barely are like acknowledged on screen, even though it's like Juliette Lewis was pretty popular at the time, and Michael Rappaport was just starting, and he had the shaved head still from Higher Learning, and he has what amounts to a cameo.
And they make him like a badass, which is like, that's not Michael Rappaport.
Exactly. It's like, well, I mean, as skinny as Leonardo DiCaprio is in this role, he's huge compared to him, you know? So I'm just like, I mean, like I said, I really enjoy this film, and, you know, it eventually got attacked for people claiming for one scene, which is a fantasy where he in a leather trench coat and blows away his like Catholic school teachers and enemies, that this was a film that inspired school shooters, when I'm just like, it's like a 30-second scene, and you really think this film inspired? But yet they were inspired by that, but none of them went on to go do heroin, you know?
Yeah, wasn't there like a thing where like when the Columbine shooting happened, they had the scene removed from the VHS copies?
I don't know if it was just it was removed from VHS copies, or when they would air the film, they would just take the scene out.
It was one of the two.
Yeah, and it was just like, you know, obviously they were overreaching at the time. But on the plus side, it got people talking about the movie again, which again, the movie it's good for what it is, but if you're expecting more than that, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Watch it more for the performances. You know, you have all these Sopranos actors before, you know, they got really big in the movie. You have kind of an all-star cast with like even now more known actors in small roles. But I mean, again, it comes off more like an MTV style movie more than anything. Or like I said before, it's an MTV style movie that could easily be an MTV version of an after school special. Because even at the end, when he's kicked off drugs and he sees an old friend as he's going into a building, you know, when he's sitting there and saying all this, you're wondering, is this like rehab, or is this like a spoken word performance? Because they never really emphasize what the hell it is, and it's like, okay, so this is just how we're just gonna end the film, and it's just like a weird ending. I mean, on the plus side, we know he got clean, and so I guess that was the overall thing, but we still don't know what is he doing with his life. And
Yeah,
I
I
take
think they
it.
were trying to reflect like the real Jim Carroll, who became like a successful writer and, talking about his addiction. And the funny thing about this film too was there were many points early in its development where they wanted River Phoenix to do this film, and
Mhm.
he was interested. I mean, he was loosely attached for a time, but after a while, this was before his unfortunate death, he felt he was too old for the part. He was already like well into his 20s, and clearly the part needed to be played by somebody much younger. And DiCaprio, I believe, was just at the edge of 20 when he did this film. So that's what makes it so remarkable. Like you said, Wahlberg looks way too old compared to everybody else, but DiCaprio certainly was age appropriate for what was necessary. And I agree with you about maybe the heavy-handedness of his whole arc, where it's like, okay, he gets caught up in the drugs. Like, it's one thing when he's experimenting and jacking off on the roof and all. He's doing like the stupid bullshit teenage stuff before he gets into the drugs. And then we just like literally go way, way down with him, with having to run away from the mom, and then do stuff like robbing, like delis and stealing cars. Like we're just really going to the lengths of how much he's trying to get money to buy drugs, and then to go real deep with him, like have the guy in the subway sucking his thing. Like now we're just like, how much damage do we have to do to this kid to say this is bad, and ultimately he's going to get arrested and then he'll get clean when he goes to prison? I mean, you just pick your spots. You don't have to go so hard to scare people. Just what you show. It basically, this is like the Children of Times Square, but with a bigger budget. That's how it feels.
Well, yeah, because like you said, it just keeps getting lower. Like, okay, we're at here just stealing money from my mom. Then now we're robbing these people. Now, oh, I got to turn tricks in a Times Square bathroom. It's just like, when is he going to wake up and realize maybe this isn't the life I want to live? And then again, his ass kicking by, of all people, Michael Rappaport. I mean, if it had been now, it would have been like a career low where it's like, I'm getting my ass kicked by Michael Cera.
One small nitpick that I have about this movie. So
Okay.
after, I think it was the scene when they robbed the store and the friend gets arrested, and they go to a bar, and the first thing that they get, first of all, how are they even allowed to go into a bar when they're not 21? And two, going into the bar and ask for Coke. I mean, you're doing drugs, and the first thing you think about is soda? I mean, I don't get that.
Well, I can see how Marky Mark got into the bar. They were like, "Aren't you 50?" Well, that's another problem with the film. It's sort of like the problem with the show The Goldbergs, which works to its advantage, where we never say when this is exactly taking place, so we can throw in as much pop culture as we can. But the book is written in the 70s, so it has a lot of 70s references, but it seems like they're trying to set it during the 90s, which really confuses the audience, because it's like, wait, is this the 70s? Like, if it was the 1970s, I can understand how they're getting into the bar and all this kind of trouble. But if it's the 90s, it's like there's no way they'd be able to get in looking how they looked,
And at
with
that,
the drugs, pulling the same sort of scams and all that. And, especially like in the 90s, no offense, we had, John Starks, the Knicks. Those were people who looked like basketball players. You would not think skinny Leonardo DiCaprio is going to make a professional college team unless it was the Celtics.
yeah,
And
and
so,
then also too, this was like the end of the Dinkins era, going into the Giuliani era of New York. So they were already beginning to kind of clean up the city, not completely, but stuff that they were doing there that felt like it should have been from a different era. And then, of course, Ernie Hudson's role was strange. I get the purpose of his
yeah,
part, but I never really understood what he was. Was he an actor? Was he a rehab guy? Like, they never really say, which was like so
I thought
weird.
it was
Like when
like,
he's like taking off his belt and, oh, you want me to suck you? I
no,
don't understand.
man, not you.
Like, I know he's a recovering addict himself, but it just something felt off about him. And I love Ernie Hudson. I thought, he was fine for what he was doing. It's just, I don't think his role was ever clearly defined.
No, it wasn't. That was another problem, with the movie. Plus, the little writing we do get from Leonardo DiCaprio's character in the movie, I know it's Jim Carroll's writing, but it doesn't seem that impressive. Like,
No.
Man, you're a natural born writer, So that was another thing. Like, even though he wants to be a basketball star throughout this all, and then when his best friend, who kind of introduced him to the girls, who kind of got him into coke in the first place, goes on to be, this college or high school college basketball star, and then we never hear from that character ever again. And it's like every other character we're kind of reunited with. We know what happens to Marky Mark's character. We see his other friend, still as a junkie at the end. Even Juliette Lewis, who was like just junkie in the beginning, now has cleaned up by the end of the film. And, like I said, I just like bringing up, and Michael Rappaport in this movie just playing a thug, he only has one scene, but, and also it even has your old friend, Bruno Kirby in the movie, and one of his more stronger supporting roles. You have Josh Mostel, you have Vincent Pastore, Toby Huss, who some of you might remember as Artie from The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Again, the Daniel twins. Probably, well, at least for Cynthia Daniel, one of her bigger roles. Brittany Daniel kept acting, in a lot of Keenan Ivory Wayans films. So, we kept seeing her. Like I said, Michael Imperioli. Like I said, it's also a film that is a time capsule, even though it's supposed to be set in the 70s. It's obviously in the 90s.
It's obviously 90s.
And it shows that 90s kind of filmmaking too. This is like next to actual MTV films. This is the MTV style movie, only better done than those other ones, because this was not supposed to be a comedy, it's supposed to be a drama. And I would still recommend it, especially if you want to see like the beginnings of Leonardo DiCaprio's career, where you can start seeing like him doing, better performances. I'm even going to say this, even though it's a better directed film, I would recommend his performance in this movie over something like The Quick and the Dead, which he was also in, because I feel like he has more to work with here. And I mean, obviously, he's the lead, so it's more focused on him. So I like this film way more than I like that film. So I would definitely recommend people see it. Like I said, just know what you're going to get. You're not going to get like your new favorite movie in the world, but I think you will be entertained, and I think you'll be astonished at, how well, even at a young age, Leonardo DiCaprio was as an actor.
Yeah, it's a film for its time, but totally worth it for his performance and showing what kind of greatness he was going to come to be.
And any final, do you have anything else to say before we leave on this movie or deep dive?
I would just say check it out if you can. And, as long as you can find a version that has no cuts in it, that's the version you have to see.
Exactly. Get, all the guts and glory version of this. Don't watch the sanitized TV version of this. So that, unfortunately, that ends our business this episode, where we took a look at 1995's Leonardo DiCaprio star, The Basketball Diaries. But until next time, can't wait to see you again.